Thursday. Is it Thursday?
It is Thursday
evening. Yeah, week's going to fly really fast. But yeah, it's July already, which is nuts. Thank you to our new members. I'm seeing a few new faces tonight. So if it's your first time, welcome to the Sussex Azure user group.
Yeah, and obviously everybody's got name tags, so new addition for this month. So don't be afraid. You know each other's name. That's written on their chest, so you can say hello to each other. We have got a few more still to arrive, so if somebody does want to keep an eye on the door, that would be amazing. Thank you, Steve. A few people traveling from London, but we will get cracking nonetheless. We're also live on YouTube and LinkedIn, so hello to anybody tuning in. So I think, as always, right, this is our standard disclaimer. Myself and Ryan do work for Microsoft, and there are a few others in the room who work for other companies. You know, it's all our own opinions here tonight, so feel free to speak, ask questions. Nobody's going to hold this against you. And if you say, hey, Microsoft told me this, we'll deny everything.
It's an important disclaimer. We were just going to spend kind of 5 minutes talking about the group, why we set it up, most importantly, our diversity charter. So anyone's welcome to this group, regardless of age, color, whatever. If you don't think any of these values on the screen are being upheld in this evening or any other time, just let us know, and we'll sort it out. But yeah, it's important that anyone's welcome, whether you're developer or not, even if you don't work in the IT industry. Just it's a place to come and learn and socialize and network.
Absolutely, and we haven't had any issues to date, so long may that continue.
Yes.
So we're backed by the awesome team from Silicon Brighton. So you may have met Steve, Alex, and the awesome Charlie Hula over on the side, so the awesome AV support. We could not run this without these guys. We used to do this on our own for about 2 years without the support of Silicon Brighton, and then one day they did reach out and say, hey, do you want some support from us? We, offer free support. And me and Ron were like, this has got to be too good to be true. This has got to be too good to be true.
What is this phishing?
But no, we were really glad. I think there is somebody at the door. We'll get them in. But we could not do this without this. So all the new branding, all the new theming, all the AV support, all the things that we aspire to do with getting this live on YouTube, we were never able to do. So a huge thank you to Silicon Brighton.
And please check out some of their other groups as well. There's Brighton Cloud, if you're into PHP. I think there's about like 30 groups or something.
Yes,
so they've
25, 30 groups.
Massive amount of other user groups in the local area.
And these are some of the ones that are coming up. So if you're about next week, there's one back here on Monday, which I highly recommend. Ryan was a guest on this meetup on their panel last time. It's all about people who are getting started in tech. So if you're new to tech completely and you're looking to get into it, this one's going to be really interesting because it's not all about coding. So it's about non-technical roles within tech. So I think it'll be really fascinating. It'll also be streamed by the awesome Silicon Brighton team. So if you want to tune in remotely, you can do that as well. And then on Wednesday down at Motorway, which I didn't get a chance to update, but I saw that come through earlier. It's down where One Family is, or Churchill Square car park is, right on the corner. So it's Simon's offices. Simon works for Motorway. And they're going to be talking about AWS account baselines. So a bit similar to Azure landing zones, but what you do for AWS. So if you're that way inclined or multi-cloud, well worth checking out as well.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
That's the next one.
So...
yeah, sponsors. So we always welcome sponsors. Typically, Jack and I fund this ourselves, and it's great to get a bit of help along the way. So we work with local, typically IT companies in the local area to help us run these events, helps with the organising and a bit of funding as well for the beer and pizza that you would have enjoyed tonight. So I don't know if we want to hand over to Mark just to give us a quick background on who Akora are and what they do.
Please, Ben.
Hi, so my name is Mark Summers. I'm a solutions architect at Akora. It's a pleasure to sponsor this event, and it's so lovely to see you all here and those online as well. So who are Akora? What do we do? We are a managed service provider. We've got over 10 offices now worldwide, mainly focus around most of our revenue comes from the managed service contracts, but we do work on projects as well as apps and data now is a big focus for us, as well as security. So we've recently bought a security operations center business, so we're now focusing our business around that as well. But it's good we're able to build all of those solutions together and basically come together and sell to all of these products to multiple customers. So yeah, what do we do? End user computing, managed services, apps and data, and cyber security. Yeah, and what makes us different is that we're able to implement all of those together. And all of our service desk and SOC teams all work as one effectively. So yeah, that's what makes us unique. And yeah, this is what we stand for. So we always say, be the best you can be. We do what we say, so we make sure that we stick to the contract. We make sure that we implement projects well, and make sure that customers enjoy the work that we implement. And together we win. So all the teams at Cora always make sure we work together. We want the customers to have the best experience possible. So that is us, and that's our website, www.core.com. If you want any more information, I'll be here afterwards as well if anyone wants a chat. But there you go, over to you guys.
Thank you very much, mate. And in case some of you didn't know, me, Ryan, Sat, if you've met in the audience, and Nick, all used to work at Acora. So Mark's the only one still there. We've all moved on to bigger things and other things, but Acora was a great place to work, and I think all those values that he spoke about, something we all truly believe in. I won Game Changer of the Year one year, so I've got a big T-shirt that says I'm a game changer, and I still wear it to do decorating. So it's still around. So, but really great company, based in Burgess Hill, and lots of offices now. They've grown way bigger than when we left. So yeah, please do go and check them out if you're looking for a new role, or if you're looking for some managed service as well.
Good stuff, right? So our next meetup, we haven't got a speaker yet, and this is where we typically go out to our community and say, do you want to talk about something? Is it an idea that you've got for a project? Have you had an experience with an Azure product that you want to talk about, or have you learned something new, or something that's gone wrong? You tried to do something in Azure, it didn't go quite how you expected, you managed to work around it in a certain way. If you think there's something that you think other people would find interesting to hear about, just let us know. We'd love to hear it. We've done talks on a lot of product stuff, a lot of kind of things like infrastructure as code kind of concepts and whatnot. But we're keen to kind of expand that into just more experienced customer journeys, all that kind of goodness. So yeah, just let us know, and we'll have that in late September. And we're going to break for the summertime because everyone goes on holiday and would rather spend time on the beach than listening to us.
Absolutely. And we have got, if any of you have had a talk from John Craddock in the past, the legend that is John Craddock, he has done a couple of amazing Azure AD, or should I now say Microsoft Entra talks after the renaming news this week. He has already reached out to us over email yesterday and said, hey, I've published a new YouTube video on all the changes in Entra and secure, I can't remember what it is, SSE, I can't remember what it stands for, so that's bad for me. But he's already done a 50-minute YouTube video on it. It's got like a couple of thousand views already. Go and check it out. It's very worthwhile. And he's offered to come and do some talks on all the changes in Entra as an idea. So if nobody does have any ideas and people will be interested in that, then also let us know, because John is very willing to come and give us another talk on that stuff. And it's always one not to be missed with John.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is something new that we're going to try, right? So our typical kind of outlets to our community members are emails via Meetup. We push our events through LinkedIn, Twitter, things like that. But actually, we've realized there's no central place for our members to communicate with each other. And it might be that we start to do a few more social things like, hey, who wants to meet in the pub on a Friday night? Not just talk about Azure, but just catch up and meet new people. But we would kind of encourage you to join our new WhatsApp community group. I think I've not played with this, but you don't have to like put in your phone number, or
it's just a WhatsApp, right? So you join a group, it's another group that appears, but there's a community. So we can send some announcements out as well. So you'll notice that, but you can chat with each other. Obviously keep it PC and keep it very nice and follow our diversity charter and the standard of conduct or code of conduct. But it's a good way of everybody staying in touch when we're not here, right? Because we only meet every 2 months, and we want to give people that opportunity to ask questions of each other, or like, hey, I've got an idea for an event, or anything like that.
Azure News is a good one, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I think there's Inspire next week that starts, one of the Microsoft conferences, and there's going to be a load of new product announcements there. So if you see anything and go, hey, that's actually really cool, I like that feature, I'm going to use that, post it on the group and let other people know, and we can talk about it and build that community even more.
But yeah, and obviously give us your feedback, right? If it works or it doesn't work, then absolutely fine. But we thought we'd give it a go. Actually came out of a really interesting chat that Charlie was at, and something that Alex arranged on Tuesday night, where all the meetup organisers get together and talk about everyone. And this is one of the things that came out was, hey, how do we actually make our communities more like a community when we're not there? So we thought, hey, let's go agile and try it straight away. So from Tuesday to here, we're live, and we'll give it a go, and we'll be the alpha and beta testers for the rest of the communities. So yeah, join. If you do lose access to the code, let us know. I can add you in later, no problem at all.
Yeah, we'll share it all on LinkedIn and all that stuff.
I'll fire a mail out or something.
Right, so we've got a bunch of content. So we've been going 4 years now, which is crazy to think. But we started out doing some YouTube vids. During lockdown, Jack and I were doing podcasts virtually or from the pub, and where we could meet up and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a bunch of content. Some of it might be slightly aged now, but there's some interesting ones about things like how to take a Microsoft exam. So if you're studying for like Azure certifications, we had quite a good chat that's probably still relevant actually, in terms of like how the questions are structured and all those. And that was one of our highest hitting videos. So there's a load of good content on there, so check it out.
Also, the one with Maria about responsible AI is a really interesting
that's
chat.
That's very involved now. Yeah,
so,
we'll see how out of date that is now.
But yeah, definitely go and check that one out as well. And obviously, if anybody wants any more content, let us know. But with that, I suppose we better get into a bit about today. So we've all had pizza and drinks. We're a little bit behind, a lot of bad traffic and travel plans today. So we've pushed it back a little bit, but we're going to be getting into a bit of Azure Infrastructure as Code Decoded, and how we master those fundamentals, the data types, and how I go about testing it and stuff like that. And we're into however long the conversation goes on for, and here till the end. So there's lots of pizza, there's lots of drinks.
One thing I was going to ask you was, we've got, roaming mics and all that stuff. Are you happy for people to ask questions as we go through? So
100%.
Stick your hand up. I'll bring a mic over and just ask as we go, because knowing you, Jack, it's going to be a barrage of information, and it's going to be an interesting.
There's no links today. You'll be pleased to know. Like, there's no links to take note of. That's generally my thing of throwing links at people. So don't worry about that. It's all good information. But yeah, questions all the way along the way.
Right, so we'll hand over to Jack. I'll sit down,
enjoy.
Enjoy.
Sit back, relax, and I'll take it from here. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming. As we've already said, it's not common that myself and Ryan talk. I think this is the first time in a little while that I've actually talked. I think it's September 2022 the last time I spoke, so it's nearly a year. I'll take that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a senior cloud solutions architect at Microsoft. I was a former MVP, so I am now part of the MVP alumni. And I got my MVP award a month before I joined Microsoft, so I'm the shortest ever MVP probably in existence. So it's always a fun fact. I'm married to my wife, Kate, who is a geography teacher in Hove at Blatch, if any of you know Blatch very well. And we live up in Burgess Hill, so a little way away, and I work from home 100% of my time, so always about there. Big lover of sports, play cricket with a few people in the room, play golf, all that sort of stuff. Huge F1 fan, which leads us nicely onto the dog. The dog is called Lando, after Lando Norris, the F1 driver. So he sleeps through every race, so he's a great fan. But we enjoy it, and that's how he got his name. My quirky facts are: I'm a qualified football referee, so I've refereed in the FA Cup. Don't do it as much as I used to. Still qualified, but haven't done it in a few years because work gets in the way. You can't leave somebody's network down when you go, hey, I've got to go and run a referee a football match, but I'll be back, don't worry. Like, it doesn't really work like that. I'm a trained coffee barista because I got bored and I'm sitting at home and I wanted to make good coffee for myself. So that's something I nerd out in and have dragged a few others in the room into as well. Big music fan. And as I said, I was a former MVP. And in the very bottom left-hand corner, you can see how nerdy I am. And the only detail I got on my wedding was we sent out save the dates on floppy disks. So that was a really good idea. Lots of soaking floppy disks in sink and soapy water for hours trying to get labels off. And believe me, floppy disks are still expensive. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. But tonight we're talking about infrastructure as code. And hopefully all of you have heard about infrastructure as code. You've heard the buzzwords and it's been going on for a little while. But it's important to throw up different people say about this, right? So Gartner is always somebody that people look at to say, give their views on things. So they refer to infrastructure as code as programmable infrastructure is the utilization of tools and methods from software development to enable enterprises to dynamically adjust data center and cloud infrastructure by using programmable interfaces. It's a lot of words, but it does make a lot of sense. Microsoft say it in a lighter way, right? They say infrastructure as code is the management of infrastructure, so that's networks, VMs, load balancers, in a descriptive model, using the same versioning as DevOps teams uses for source code. And I think that's more a relatable description of what infrastructure as code really is. We're using those same principles that developers have been using for years, but now to define our infrastructure, to deploy that at scale and operate it in the same way and release it in the same way. So there's a couple of approaches with infrastructure as code. There's declarative and imperative. Declarative is the one that we all want to desire to, right? We want to write it once. We want to say it should look like this. Here you go, I forgot to put these in. Make it look like this. I don't care how. You're literally saying, this is what I want it to look like at the end. I don't worry about how I get there. And then you have imperative, which is very much you're writing the manual steps yourself. You're writing the logic, right? Do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. And there can be a lot of faults with that, but there's actually some pros to using some of those tools. And I don't think it's one over the other. I think there's a place for both. But declarative is definitely the one that you should be leading with. And that's what Bicep and Terraform and ARM templates and all those things are. They're declarative languages. But there will be times where you need the odd bit of imperative, like a bit of PowerShell here or a bit of AZ-CLI here to help you out. Obviously we're talking about Azure, so it'll be rude of me not to mention ARM or the Azure Resource Manager. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's our deployment and management service. So if any of you have ever seen the URL management.azure.com, that's ARM. That's the front door to access anything and deal with anything within inside of Microsoft. It's globally resilient across all of our regions and availability zones. So obviously it's the front door, it can't go down, so it's very highly available. And as I said, it's a central access point. So it fronts all of the resource providers for things like virtual machines and all that thing, networks, web apps, SQL, all of those things connect into ARM. ARM proxies all those requests to those various resource providers from whatever client you're using to access that, whether it's the portal, PowerShell, Terraform, whatever. And it looks a little bit like this when you unpack it, right? So this is a great slide that I've borrowed from one of my colleagues that I used to work with at Microsoft, Johan. And as you can see, across the top, we've got all of these different clients, whether it's Puppet, Ansible, Terraform, PowerShell, all of these different things, they all interact via various SDKs or not, directly with ARM, management.azure.com. And all of these things happen inside of ARM that we don't really need to worry about. They're there for us and we configure and manage. And then at the end of the day, we're deploying and configuring resources from that. So whether it's a virtual machine, a web app, a virtual network, but this is the layered cake of how we need to step through all of this to deploy those resources. So I've mentioned some terms already and I've slipped up and I should have saved to this. So you've heard me use the term resource provider or RP, as I will commonly refer to it throughout tonight. If anybody at any point is like, I use an acronym and they're like, what is he on about? Just stick your hand up and I'll explain it because it's easy to slip into them. So RPs are the service that supplies those Azure resources. So when we saw those bigger logos at the bottom, all those boxes at the bottom for compute and virtual networks, there are different resource providers for different types of services. So there's a resource provider for networking, there's a resource provider for compute, which handles virtual machines and things like that. There's a resource provider for SQL, there's a resource provider for policy, there's a resource provider for RBAC. There's different resource providers all across those things. And within resource providers, they can have different resource types. So when you see some of the API specs, you'll see Microsoft.compute/virtual machine. The Microsoft.compute part is the resource provider. That's the API you're talking to behind ARM. So once you go through ARM, that's the service you're going to go and try and interact with. And then you're telling it what type of resource you want to interact with behind that. So when you've got the / you've got virtual machines, you're saying, hey, I want to talk to the virtual machines resource type as part of the Microsoft.compute resource provider. Each type has its own schema, so they don't always look the same. They'll have some common properties like name, location, tags, those sort of things. But once you get inside of that, They've all got their own schema, and they're all documented, and you can find them on the docs links on the site. But we get to this horrible question. This is one that came from Alex, who you may have met in the room. I was chatting to him earlier today. I was like, if I was to cover one thing tonight, what would you want me to cover? And he's like, Bicep versus Terraform. And I'm like, oh God, not again. Like, okay. But everybody asked me this question, and I think it comes up so many times. Like, what one should I use? Should it be Bicep? Should it be Terraform? And we're going to get into a little bit of that. So, firstly, it's not a competition, right? They're both awesome. They both serve their purpose. They both deliver what you are looking for them to do as infrastructure as code languages. So don't try and treat them as it's a competition versus each other. It's the right tool for the right purpose, and we'll get into more of that. Terraform state is a very important factor into this. So if any of you have used Terraform in the room, state is a very important consideration of where you store that, how you secure it, because without the state, Terraform is pretty useless without it. And if you start deploying resources with Terraform and you are then to lose its state file, you're in a whole world of pain, my friends, because it will go, oh, I'm going to redeploy everything. And you're like, please don't. Or I'm going to delete all this stuff. Or it all needs to be imported because I can't see it anymore. So state is very much important for Terraform. But for Bicep, we don't actually have state to worry about because we use what is deployed in Azure, and we do get calls to Azure to tell us what the state is. So we don't have to worry about storing state. So sometimes that's a bit of an advantage. However, we'll get into a point further on where state actually gives a little bit of a pro to Terraform. There's a lot of words in this one, but I'll try and break it down. How they deploy is fundamentally different. So you remember me talking a little bit earlier around declarative versus imperative. Terraform technically is imperative. Right? You write it in a declarative format. You say, I want a VM, I want a resource group, I want disks, I want a virtual network. But under the hood, Terraform actually doesn't go and talk to ARM. It uses ARM to talk to all the individual resource providers beneath it, and it hammers each RP with multiple API calls directly, right? So it doesn't talk the same way that Bicep deployments do or ARM deployments do. It absolutely hammers each of those resource providers' APIs, which actually technically makes it imperative, right? Because Terraform is handling that logic of do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. Whereas when you do a Bicep or an ARM deployment, you do one deployment to ARM, ARM works it out. So you can think about Terraform as being more of a client-side processing, like all of the clever stuff happens where the Terraform runner is running from, all of the dependency logic. Whereas when you do something in Bicep, you submit that to Azure, you submit that to the Azure Resource Manager as a deployment. It then takes all of the dependency logic, all the processing, all of like, right, I've got to do this, then this, then this, off of you. So ARM actually is truly declarative because it's server-side in that sense. So you can think about it in that way. Yes. Oh, already, go for it.
Terraform versus Bicep, state files or no state files. What are your thoughts, pros and cons on state files?
Stay tuned. Stay
Okay,
tuned.
coming up.
But coming up, we've got a few more slides, but let us know if it's not answered in the next couple of slides. And this is what I was talking around, right? To try and visualize what I was just talking around. Bicep or ARM, it's one deployment that's submitted to the Azure Resource Manager, and it goes off and it interacts with those various resource providers and services beneath it. Whereas when you're doing something non-declarative based, Azure CLI, PowerShell, and technically Terraform will definitely say they're a declarative language, and I would agree with them. How you write Terraform is declarative. How Terraform works under the hood is technically imperative. So it's just an important thing to remember, because in some larger deployments, we see customers with Terraform actually hit some of the API-like throttling limits faster than customers who are using ARM, because they're making lots of calls very quickly. Like, because Terraform not only does a put to say, hey, create this thing, it first of all checks, does that thing exist? So it does a get first, that's one call, then does a put, and then it keeps doing gets until it says, oh, it's as per what I've defined. So it can make up to 10 calls for one thing, whereas ARM will go one call and just wait. And like when it says it's done, that's fine. So it's a lot less calls when you're doing an ARM deployment. So some larger deployments, you can run into throttling limits quite easily in Terraform. Private DNS zones is one that's coming up in my world quite a lot at the moment. Virtual network links, trying to link like 80 DNS zones to a VNet. Yeah, you'll probably hit a throttling issue, and you'll probably get told a 429 HTTP response saying back off, like hold up. And the Terraform provider will handle that to some degree, and it will know to wait and handle it. but sometimes in bigger deployments, you'll actually get a failure and say, hey, I couldn't apply this because of this error. So run it again, it will generally work, but just something to be aware of. So back to Terraform and Bicep. This is where state gets important, deleting resources. So you cannot delete resources in Bicep or ARM today, right? You can technically with something called complete mode deployment, which we'll cover in a second on another slide. And also something that's just coming out in preview that was announced on the Bicep community call last week, which is called deployment stacks, which have been long awaited. People have been waiting years for this. I originally heard about these in Florida 2019 at Ignite. So it's been cooking a long time and it's finally coming, which is great to see. But Terraform can delete resources, right? Because it works in that different way and it has its state file and it knows what it's deployed. It then knows, well, I know the resource ID to go and delete that thing. I know how to delete that thing in which order and what needs to go first because it's got that local copy of its state file. So when you update your Terraform configuration and you say, hey, I don't want that virtual machine anymore, and you delete it out of your code base and you do Terraform apply, it goes, well, that VM's going. Cool, I know where it is. I'll go and push a delete call to it. Whereas ARM can't do that today. It's just not the way that ARM's ever been built to handle deletes. So that's one pro and con that a lot of people get caught up on, I would say, in the Infra-as-Code world is, well, I'm going to need to delete resources. Now, I'll be completely honest, how often you're going to need to delete resources, probably very little. People think it's a lot higher than it is. But actually, once you're in a steady state, you're probably not going to be wanting to delete resources. You're probably going to be updating the same resources and updating their config rather than deleting them constantly. So don't get caught up on it too much because you can always just run some imperative stuff, PowerShell, CLI, just to go and delete the resource group or delete that individual resource. So there are ways around it that you can handle it. It doesn't all have to be in one language. But if you do, Terraform is today something to look at. This one, I'm sure many people in the room have been burnt by. Retro adopting Terraform is painful. So if you've deployed a load of stuff in the portal, or you've done it with Bicep, or you've done it with something else, and then you try and adopt Terraform later, it's a very painful experience. It's getting better. Actually, in a release they released last week, or the week before. But because Terraform has its state file, you need to get that resources configuration now into your state file. But because it didn't originally deploy it, it doesn't have anything in its state file. So when you start, your state file is blank. So you now need to tell Terraform to import these resources into your state file. It can then manage them from that state forward. But not only have you got to import it, you've also got to write the Terraform configuration to match how it currently looks today running live in production, right? So it's quite hard to match it up sometimes, and you'll do quite a lot of Terraform plans, and then it'll be like, oh, I'm going to change this thing. You'll be like, right, need to specify something else, and you'll do Terraform plan again, and it'll be like, oh, I need to specify something else. So you have to keep tweaking it until you get it right, until it says, hey, I'm going to make no changes, and then you're like, perfect, I've nailed it, right? I've got it right. Now I can do my import, and off we go. Importing used to be a CLI only operation. You used to have to run Terraform import and then the resource ID and then the name of the resource in Terraform that you would specify as. And that could be sometimes quite painful in a DevOps world because nobody would have access to run that because the state file would be locked away behind a runner and you'd have to build your whole pipeline just to do imports. It could be quite painful. Terraform have heard, or HashiCorp should I say have heard, and they've released in version 1.5 of Terraform as a preview, something called import blocks. So you can now specify an import in your Terraform code. So you can literally type import, open up an object and say, import this resource ID to this thing, and it runs it as part of a Terraform apply. So you don't no longer have to run it as a separate step. It's awesome. I used it the other week and it for a really large customer. I was like, this would have been so painful and such an awkward conversation if this didn't exist. So Terraform import blocks are fantastic. Also, the Microsoft Terraform product group, so Mark and his team, have done an amazing job with something previously known as AZTFY or Azure Terrafy. They've renamed that. I was not a fan of it originally. I did sort of call that out. I was like, people might be a bit nervous about calling something Terrafy, but you know, the open source world's a bit quirky and you get away with some names like that. It's now called the Azure Exporter for Terraform or Azure Export for Terraform. Much more Microsoft name, much more friendly and tells you what it is. But what that does is you can scope it to a resource group. So say you've got a resource group already deployed via the portal or whatever, you can run this tool against it and it'll go, cool, which things do you want to import into Terraform? And then it not only will do the imports for you, but it'll also write the Terraform configuration for you as well and put it in your files. So it's great for retro adopting some estates, but it only works at sort of the resource group and subscription scope. So it doesn't work at those higher scopes like management groups and tenant level, but it's good for actual resources that are running in the wild. So definitely go and check that one out. I've used it a few times. Very good. The code's not perfect, right? It works. And if you did a Terraform plan, it won't change. So that's the thing you need. But it doesn't, it's not the prettiest looking code in the world, right? It's machine generated. It's not perfect, but it gets you off the ground. You can then always go and improve it and make it to your standards. And I think this is the overall thing, right? Use what's right for you and your organization. There is no winner here. Like, both are very much suited to doing the same job. It's what have you got skills in? If you've got Terraform skills, great, use Terraform. If you've got Bicep skills, go and use Bicep. Like, you're better off moving forward and making a decision and getting on with it, rather than worrying about what one to use for 6 months, right? Or even better, go and get hands-on with it, right? If you're are stuck, just go and try both of them. Go and try and do the same thing in both and see which one you get on with more. So that's my bit on Terraform versus Bicep. The short answer is, doesn't matter. Choose whatever one you like. If you just hold a gun to my head, I'll run, because like there is no right answer. There is also a document that's been recently written by the product group. So if you go to aka.ms/TF and Bicep, there's like a 2-page article, all in one with a tab at the top, that talks around the pros and cons of Terraform and Bicep and what to think about. So again, that's very much sits on the fence as an article, because it's a conversation you have to sit on the fence for. There's no right answer here. We talked about complete and incremental deployment modes just a second ago. By default, everything you do in an ARM template or Bicep is incremental, with good reason. Because if you do run it in complete mode, whatever is not defined in your ARM or Bicep template will be removed at the scope you deploy at. Now, this only works at resource group scope, so it's fairly limited blast radius, so it can be quite safe to use. But please use what if, which is, it tells you what it's going to do before you run this, because I had a customer last week went, hey, we run a complete mode deployment template on our Azure firewall, but we didn't define the firewall in the template. And you're like, your firewall's not there anymore, is it? And they're like, no. I was like, how do we get it back? I was like, you don't. Like, that's it, it's gone. You've done something you shouldn't have done. They went, well, we thought complete meant this. And I was like, did you check the docs first? Did you just think it was a good idea? So, it can be very powerful, but it's also very dangerous if you're not aware what it's doing. So hence why we default to incremental. We'll only ever add to, we won't remove resources. But as I say, complete mode is looking to go away with deployment stacks. So if any of you aren't watching the Bicep community call, which happens monthly and is stored on YouTube, and it happens in different time zones every other month. But go and check it out on YouTube. It's on the Azure Deployments and Governance YouTube channel. If you watch this month's, the whole talk is about deployment stacks and the future of what complete mode will evolve into. Really great work from the team. And I think a lot of people will move to that in the future when it comes out in more GA, but preview should be in the next few weeks. I've talked an awful lot. I've talked about lots of technical things that I said I wouldn't talk about to start this talk, but with good purpose, right? Because we've only scratched the surface there of infrastructure as code, but actually there's so much more to it that we need to get into. And actually it all starts with data types. So the purpose of this talk is not to teach you Terraform, Bicep, anything like that. It's actually to bring you back to some more fundamentals, because when I was learning infrastructure as code, I obsessed about learning Terraform or Bicep or ARM, but I didn't understand actually the data types and things that I was working with. So then when I was working in infrastructure as code languages, I'd see square brackets and I'd be like, no idea what that means, but we'll carry on. See squiggly brackets and be like, again, no idea, but you do different things with them, so I'll carry on. But without understanding those fundamental concepts, it's very hard for you to ever get past sort of level 100, 200 infrastructure as code. And it's also you're pigeonholing yourself into one language because you think you only know one language when actually you don't. You know a lot more. And this was like, I don't know, probably 2-3 years ago, the penny suddenly dropped. Like I could write ARM and I could write Terraform, and I learned Bicep as it came out. But I was like, hold on, these are all the same thing. Like I now understand what that bracket thing means. Like, and I know when I would use it. So this is the purpose of this talk tonight. I really want to bring us back to learn these fundamental things, and it doesn't matter what language you go and learn, whether it's Python, PowerShell, Terraform, Bicep, you'll see similar concepts across all of them. And these are the important things to learn, because you'll learn every language that comes along in the future, because there will be more, there always is. But you'll be faster at learning those languages. So I did think this was going to happen. I did have a form on this. I was like, I'll try a new quiz thing in PowerPoint. That'll go well. Yeah, demo on the night never works really well. So it's going to be a quiz on what data type is this, but we'll skip that then, and we'll move on. So the tip is use the docs. So I think all of the documentation for all the infrastructure as code languages. So we've got ARM templates on the left, Terraform in the middle, Bicep on the right. You don't need to worry what's written on them. But if you Google data types in the language, you will find these pages. They are saviors, because they will teach you exactly how this data type works. So what the difference between an array and object, all these different things are. And we're going to be going into these in a lot more detail in a bit. So bear with. The quiz is a bit of a shame. But all of these things, as I was saying, they're the same but slightly different. So when you see text declared, and I appreciate this is pretty small, but text is always known as strings pretty much in every language. No matter what language you're writing in, text, free text in double quotes or single quotes is a string. Every language operates it and calls it the same thing. You can carry on there. Numbers, when you see numbers on their own, not inside speech marks, because if they're inside speech marks, they are strings. But when they're outside of speech marks, they are known as numbers or integers or floats. Or like there are lots of different things, right? They are known as, but they are all basically the same thing. So in ARM and Bicep, you only have integers, right? Whole numbers like 1, 10, 15, 360, whole numbers. But in other programming languages like Bicep, no, sorry, not like Bicep, like Terraform or Python or something like that, you'll see things referred to as floats. And floats basically means there's a floating decimal point somewhere in that number. So 5.86, 15.9, right? That point is somewhere in that number. So it's a floating decimal place that exists somewhere in there. Now, in, as I said, ARM Bicep, floats aren't supported. If you try and put a float in an integer, it will go, you can't do that, it's a float. So it knows what it is, you just can't use it. And that's been a long-running issue that's well known. And to be fair, we don't come across it all that often because all of the downstream services know not to take floats in. We have a float function to get around one weird quirk in logic apps, but it's not really well used. So you don't very often see floats.
Are there any research providers that you need floats for that you run into Bicep or Terraform?
Yeah, so the question is, are there any resource providers that need floats to basically configure their services or stuff downstream? And the answer today is only logic apps is the only one I'm aware of. So even when you go into the documentation, it calls out it's just logic apps that you need this for in the workflows, because sometimes you'll want to configure a float in there. So yeah, that's the only one. Terraform does support floats, but it's via the number data type. So you use number for whatever it is. So whether it's a whole number or a float, doesn't matter. You just use it. It knows how to handle it. It's much smarter. Booleans, most simple one out of all of them, right? True or false? Like literally as simple as that. It's true or it's false. And it's not in quotation marks. If you put it in quotation marks, you've turned it into a string. So leave it without the quotation marks and it's known as a Boolean. We then have the more complex sort of data types. So we've got objects and arrays. So objects are the ones in the curly brackets, or braces as they're officially known, but curly brackets is pretty much how everybody refers to them. And in Bicep and ARM, you refer to them as objects. In Terraform, they're referred to as maps. You can also have an object in Terraform, which is great fun. And the difference is an object can have different data types within it, whereas a map all have to be the same data types within that map. Again, really niche things that you learn, but objects and maps can exist in both, just objects in ARM and Bicep. Dictionaries, who's heard of a dictionary before? Not the one that you read to look up words, or we used to, but like dictionaries inside. Dictionaries are a type of objects, but they are objects within objects. So they are inception objects, as I like to call them, because it's a dream within a dream. Objects are, and the objects are in a sequential order of objects. So they're defined by a thing, right? And we'll look at an example of some of these in a minute to start making this come to life. But yeah, know that dictionaries are types of objects. They're just objects within objects. And then we've got arrays. So brackets, square brackets, box brackets, whatever you want to call them. These are all things that they're known as. And these have a few more commonly known as, right? So in ARM and Bicep, they are arrays. Very easy. In Terraform, it could be a list, it could be a tuple, or it can be a set. And they are all slightly different, list, tuple, and sets. So a list and an array are the same. They're effectively a free-for-all. You can put whatever you like inside them, right? It's just a list of things. Like you can put whatever you like inside of them, different data types, integers, bools, strings. You can mix and match, happy days. Tuples are immutable. So once you set them, you cannot change them. So they're better for statically defined code. Like you always want these things in this array, create as a tuple, you can never change it. And then you've got sets. So you can change sets, but stuff inside of the set cannot be duplicated. So if you create a set, it will dedupe the data within it, and it will randomize the order. So it does it on lexogeospatial. It's written in docs. I don't even understand what that word means, but that's apparently where it does it on. So it rearranges the entire thing. So going to take a little bit of a pause there, see if anybody's got any questions, anything like that, before we move on.
There's one question online.
Go for it.
When starting out with infrastructure as code, how important is it to use parameters in the files versus static declarations, i.e. one part file per spoke in a hub spoke versus one file that can make any spoke? I hope you understand that more than me.
Yeah, I do. I think when you're starting out with infrastructure as code, the first tip is get it working, right? However you get that working, it doesn't matter. Just get it working, because you know then have got a known good state that you can always fall back to. But then once you then start learning more and evolving more, quite commonly, it'll be statically defined values in one big file, right? That's how most of us start. And then you'll be like, why am I rewriting the same code all the time to do the same task, but slightly different, right? I might want to change the name of a virtual network, or I might want to change the address space or something like that. How do I do those things? And that's where you'll be like, how do I modularize my code? How do I break it down into more like modular chunks that I can then reuse more often? And that's when parameters then become really, really important for you, because you need to be able to pass in different values at the time you call that module. So I think start with whatever works for you. Most of us, I'm pretty sure, will say it starts in one big file, statically defined, you get it working, and then you start reverse engineering your code. And I'll come into some of the tools, and we'll show a bit of GitHub Co-Pilot later about how that can actually help you do some of those things as well. So work smarter, not harder. Any other questions from the room while we're here? And gives me another chance to grab a beer. No, all good. All right. No chance. No. I've got one on the go, but it's cool. I'll take a soft one though. Thank you. Operators and accessors. Does anybody know what these terms mean? Perfect. That's why we're all here. So operators and accessors. So again, use the docs. You'll notice a theme throughout my talk tonight. It's just use the docs. There's all of this wonderful stuff written down that you will look at and you go, that's a lot of noise. I have no understanding of that. But actually, when you start taking it piece by piece, you'll have a greater understanding of it as well. Thank you very much. So operators and accessors. So you might know them more commonly like this. So the things that are highlighted in yellow here are common operators that you would typically see. There's some accessors in the bottom right-hand corner. We'll get into them in a second. But we all know what and is. We all know what or is. Like we've probably used these in Excel, right? Like we've done these basic things like building functions and formulas. These are all common operators that you will find across all languages defined in the same way. So and is always double ampersand, or is always two pipe symbols. And this is the same across pretty much every language that I've worked with to date. I haven't worked with many, but all of the ones that from infrastructure folk will work with, Python, PowerShell, Bash, all of those things, you'll definitely find these in Terraform, Bicep, ARM. ARM's a little bit different because ARM actually spells it out. So and is not a double ampersand. You say and. and or not, or those things. Whereas Biceps move towards the way that developers work, which is using the symbols for these things. Terraform uses the symbols as well. But no, there's lots of these, and these are just some of the basic ones. One of the more complex ones is the condition one on towards the right-hand side, just above accessors. Who's heard of a ternary operator or a ternary condition? So it's like, if this condition, the left-hand side, is true, do this, and if it's false, do this, right? So it's known as a ternary condition. And it's always defined with a question mark. So you put your bit you want to evaluate first, question mark. So that's what you're evaluating on the left. And then it's always the true value next. And then you have a colon, a colon. And then on the right-hand side of the colon, you have the false value. You can nest these together, so you can have lots of it, like if this is true, then this, but if this is true, then that, and and you can go on forever. I think the longest one I've written is about 600 characters long, and I went stir crazy because I was using the same parameters in different orders. So I had 3 parameters and just trying to flick them around for all different combinations. If any of you have used the IaC Bicep code, go in the management groups code, you'll find it. It's amazing. I think it's like, I was amazed when I pulled it off. It's one of those that you pull off after a few glasses of wine in an evening when you're in your free state of mind, like, I'll get it working, don't worry. But these are very important. And again, they're declared in every language that you will use, like the same way, and really, really useful. Accessors help you get into these complex objects and arrays that we were talking around earlier. So when you see square brackets after a data type defined, like a parameter or a variable, you're going into an index. So one thing I didn't mention about arrays that I should have is everything is put in an index starting from 0. Really important. So if you've got 3 things in an array and you want to get to the 3rd thing, what number do you type? 2. Perfect. Don't type 3 because it'll go like, way on about, there's nothing here. So it always starts at 0. So that's a good tip to keep in mind. You can also use the index accessor on a dictionary. So if you've got a strongly typed object that's an object of objects, and you've got the first one's called A, the second one's called B, and then they've got nested objects within them, you could put A in the index accessor. You say, hey, I want to access this object, but I want to access A out of this object. And the dot, this is something that blows people's mind when you see this. The dot is a function or property accessor. So say you've got an object, and you want to access a specific property of that object. If you put dot, you can then type the property name and access just that piece of information. So you haven't got to pull all of that object in. You can just access the piece you want. But these are common ones that you'll see across code bases, and very important that you know them. A lot of them are doubled up, like equals and or, doubled up, just to make it very obvious. Yes, Johnny?
Certain values have like true or false values like they do in things like
Hello.
Go again.
Do certain things have like true or false values? It's been like 1 is true and 0 is false.
Yeah.
In things like Bicep and Terraform.
Not in Bicep and Terraform. So, but if you see like a 0, it's generally false, and 1 is generally true in languages. But it does change between them, so it's well worth reading the docs. But typically, you'll see them just referred to as their primitive literal, which is true or false, right? So. Not really. These don't have defaults. These are more when you're trying to form something yourself, and you'll quite often wrap these in conditions to be like, hey, if this parameter and this parameter equals this, then do this, true value, or do this, false value. So this typically when you'll be using these conditionals is when you're trying to manipulate based on the inputs that have happened, what resources you want to deploy or what something else you want to deploy. But yeah, good question. But typically, no, they just as they are, true, false. They don't like change them or wrap them into something else. No, they don't wrap it into like 0, 0 or anything like that. No, it's you're very much a Python guy though, right? So that's why you're asking those sort of questions, because you see those things. But yeah, no, not like that. Functions. Guess what? Just use the docs. Like the docs have all of this documented very well, and the Bicep and Terraform ones always have examples as well, so you can copy and paste them and start playing with them and seeing how these things actually operate. I haven't listed the ARM ones here because they're very similar to the Bicep ones. Bicep has a lot more. They've added some more stuff into Bicep, which is great. These are the things that help you manipulate data to get a different output. So you may have an integer that's been specified from a parameter, but you actually need it to be a string. So you can wrap it in the string function and it will convert it to a string because it knows how to do that. Or you may have two strings, right? So you may have Jack as one parameter, like first name, and you may have surname defined as a second parameter. You might want to put them together and say full name, Jack Tracy, right? So you would use the concatenate function, right? So concat, or in Bicep, they've actually now stopped you from even having to write the word concat. You just put a $sign and two squiggly brackets and put them together, and it will interpolate them for you and speed you up writing concat. And if you write concat, which is absolutely valid, it'll be like, you don't need to do that anymore. You can do this shinier thing over here, and it will convert the code for you. But in Terraform, you do sometimes still need to write concat. You might have two arrays that you want to make one big array. So that's called union, right? These are all different functions that exist to help you manipulate data in different ways that you're going to come across at different times when you're going through your infrastructure as code journey. So definitely check out the docs for these, but we'll show off a few of these later. So this is a photo of me when I was younger, trying to learn to code. But we're going to start talking around. It's last week, yeah, exactly. We're going to start talking around actually how to start doing some of this stuff, right? So instead of me just talking and boring everybody to tears, let's start talking around what this stuff looks like. So here's one I did earlier. This is just a JSON file. It's an invalid JSON file, but I thought I'd show you what some of these things look like. Let me just zoom in one more level. Hopefully we can see that. So right at the top, we've got a string here. And we know it's a string because it's wrapped in quotation marks, right? So that's how we know it's a string. Now, if I was to remove these quotation marks, that's now invalid, right? That's now no longer a string. So you can already see I've got a squiggle coming up here. It's like I expected a literal. That's what it's referring to as a string. So if we put the speech marks back, everything's happy, right? Highly recommend using VS Code. It saves you a lot of headaches, and with the right extensions, it will save you most of the time. Integers are just defined as whole numbers, right? It's nothing more to integers than that. Booleans, as we spoke about, you can have true or false. Like that is literally all you can have for them. But then we get into the more complex things. So apologies, Silicon Brighton team. I've used some of your names because I thought it was easier. So we have a single line array here, right? So everything in this array is defined as one, all on one line. But that same thing can be defined across multiple lines. That is exactly valid and treated exactly the same, but it's easier to read, right? You imagine this was double its length. So we did this, and we whacked a comma on the end to make it JSON compliant, right? That is now awkward to read because I now don't know, have got any clue of what's on the other side of my file. So if we were to then have that all in one line, like I did before, that's hard. But if we split it across multiple lines, that's much easier to read, right? I can scroll up and down. And as you can see, VS Code here is, I can even collapse these things. So when I'm not worried about that stuff, hide. Like, I know what's in there. I don't need to see you. Great, move on. So the tooling supports you. And as I said earlier, an array can be of mixed types, right? So you'll see in here, I've got strings, I've got a Boolean value, I've got an integer. I've also got an object inside of an array, right, with two properties. So these are all, this is completely valid, right? You may think that's a useless array. You're completely right. There's no value in that array at all because it's garbage. But all of these things can be defined together in one. And the same works for objects. So objects are key value pairs. You always have the key on the left, the thing like name in this example, and then you have the value on the right, so the value of that property. And in this case, it's Jack. Yes, I'm 29. I work at Microsoft and I'm a speaker. Like, I've put some thought into this today. So you can also have an array of objects because I want multiple definitions of that same object. So I can wrap them in an array to say I want a list, I want multiple of these. But I can then put multiple copies of the same object inside of them. They could even be different if I was really that way inclined. Like I could remove the legend from Ryan, right? Like a bit harsh, but I could do that. And that's still completely valid array of objects. But if I was to then loop through this and say, I want all of the legend properties, it's going to get to this index of Ryan and go, well, there's no legend property, like error. Or you're going to have to build that conditional logic in to say, if legend doesn't exist, then true this, false that, right? So that's where you start wrapping these conditionals into the things that you're doing. And And as I said, you can also have a dictionary, right? So this is what a dictionary looks like. So you'll see I've moved from having every name defined every time as each index of this object to having this defined as the key for the dictionary. So I could now, you know, and we'll do this in a second, I could now say, hey, give me just Jack's properties. Give me just Alex's properties. I can do these things without having to go, hey, go and look at all of the array indexes and pull the one that's called name Alex or Jack. I can now just say, access the property called Jack inside this dictionary. Give me all that stuff about it. Quite commonly, people do this for like region config. So, hey, this is my config for UK South. This is my config for West Europe. And they'll hard define it like this. So there'll be the VNet address spaces, the number of subnets, like hard defined things. And you can also use parameters in these, right? So you could say that that company value comes from a parameter if you really wanted to, right? You can do those things. That's not a problem. But you're strongly typing in a dictionary these things so they're easier to access for you in the future. So that's a very quick overview of the data types. But let's start looking at these in language, right? So I have taken the same file, and actually I'll look at the Bicep one because it's something I work with every day and I won't make as many mistakes, which is fine. So you'll see I've now declared all of these things in the language, right? So I've declared them all as variables because that means they're statically defined and it's easy for me to work with. These could just as easily be parameters with default values, but you know, we're not talking about that stuff today. We're talking about data types. Now, the thing that I always struggled with, and I think a few people in the room that I've certainly spoken to about infrastructure as code, is they get stuck with trying to make it perfect all the time, or like they're trying to deploy a complex resource like a Kubernetes cluster all the time, but they don't actually understand what they're trying to pass in or what data type they're trying to pass in or whether their conditional logic is working in the way they think it's working. So they're actually troubleshooting like 3 or 4 different things at the same time, like, have I declared my parameters right, and my variables, and my conditional logic, and my operators? Is that data actually a string or a number that's expected there? Oh, and then have I put it in the schema of that resource correctly? I've actually got so much to troubleshoot. So some of the most complex code I write, I actually start like this. I just put the data in variables, and I start writing my conditional logic, and I start testing the data is going to work in the way that I know it's going to work. Once I know that, you know, based on my conditions and what I'm looking for, it's going to spit out that data in the format that I want it to be spat out to the property of the resource I'm deploying, I can then declare the resource and start passing in those values. Because I've already worked out the hard stuff and what data goes where, I can now just start putting that in. So start like this. Or if you're picking up some infrastructure as code that you've inherited and you're like, oh God, I don't want to redeploy this because if I get it wrong, this is either going to cost a lot of money or break something. Rip out all the resources and just make it all data, right? This is all local. So I can run this as many times as I like. I'm not actually breaking anything or deploying anything. There's no resource declaration in this template at all. So what I do is spin up a blank resource group. So I think I've actually got one here. You're going to see it's adequately named for tonight. Standard. When it loads. Demo gods, please. Not today. Just keep smashing it, it'll be fine. Yeah, there we go. Look, RSG test, because everybody's got one of those. So this is what I typically do. I'll just create a blank resource group because I need something in Bicep to deploy to. You have to deploy to resource group, subscription, management group, tenant. Resource group's the lowest scope and probably the least dangerous, so I'll use those. And I'll just start deploying stuff. So I can say, hey, new AZ resource group deployment, template file. Oh, by the way, if you like the stuff that's appearing beneath PS read line, go and install it as a PowerShell extension. Saves you many bits of typing. Template file. And then this file is in the Bicep folder and it's called data type. So I can say, wherever I am now, Bicep, template file, Bicep, and then data types.bicep. Resource group name. I appreciate this isn't looking too great, but work with me. Sometimes the PS read line get in the way when it's zoomed into 1,000,000. But I'm going to deploy this file to the resource group, right? It's not deploying any resources. All I'm doing is throwing the data to ARM and saying, give it back to me, so that I can now see what this data is doing. Now, can anybody tell me what this is going to return before it returns? from that brief. Sorry. Pretty much, it's going to return me nothing because there's nothing to return me from that file that I've declared, right? I haven't said give me an output or give me anything. It's just going, yeah, great, it works. Like, so Armor's literally just wasted a cycle there. So sorry, product group, because I've literally thrown something at it to do nothing. But we can now start digging into some of these things, right? So if I now start declaring an output, so let's say output salg1, right? And let's make this a string. So what I want to do here, actually, let's make this an object. Let's do a complex one first. I want to get Alex's details, right? I want to get what her favorite number is, company, speaker, and legend status. I want to get that out, but I don't want all of the rest of the things that's in this my dictionary of objects variable. So we need to declare this. So I can say, hey, I want an object backed because it is still an object because Alex is a dictionary and it's surrounded by curly braces. So I can say equals objects, and I can say, hey, it's in the my dictionary of objects object or dictionary. Now we're going to use the dot accessor, right? And instantly the IDE has told me, hey, I've read that. I know what's in there. So what one do you want? Well, I want Alex. Now I could even go even further and say dot, and it's going to read those things that are part of that, right? So those property accessors are there. But I may just want this first part, right? I may just want to see what's in this. So let's stick with that one for now. So let's run that again. And what we should see now is an output returned, but just of Alex's data that we asked for. Ignore that it's writing about a lot of things. It's because I'm not declaring them. But as you can see, I've got one output with the name salg1, which I defined. It's an object. And look at the things it's given me back. So it's given me back an object as we asked for with a favorite number, company, speaker, legend, and they're all of Alex's details, right? So now I know that data is being handled in the way I want it. So I could now take that and pop that into a property of a resource if I needed to, because I know that it's going to be spat to that resource and that property the way I want it to be spat to that resource. So that's one example, right? I could also just output the object, the whole thing, right? And it would give me the whole thing back. Pretty pointless because I've defined it, but you could do those things. You can then start to get into some complex or more complex pieces. So if we declare a variable here, let's do something actually that's slightly bit more simple first. So let's say we've got this string here, right? Sussex is your user group. Say I don't want it capitalized. I want it all in lowercase, right? Well, there's a function for that. So if we say output lowercase, and I can say give me back a string because that's what I want, equals, and I can say okay, 2 lower, right? And it even tells me what this function does in the IDE, and Terraform is pretty much the same. So it'll take the value to convert to lowercase, and it will convert the string. Now, what the string? I could hard type the string here, right? I could just type something there, and it would give me that back in lowercase. That's fine. But actually, I want to use that parameter. So I'll just say my string. And again, do the same thing. I literally do this all day long. Like when I'm trying to work something out, this is what I do. I just work with the data. Like, don't worry about adding resources and complexity into this right now. Get your data working in the way you want it to work first. So let this run, and then we'll see. Oh, look, we got the Sussex Azure user group back, but it's lowercase everything, right? Now, that is, you're thinking, yeah, but you know these things, right? So how do you know these things? If I look up Bicep functions, you always have to put Azure after Bicep, right? Otherwise you get some weird results. So like, not the greatest naming decision, I don't think, but yeah, you get some very interesting photos back, especially. So yeah, definitely put Azure after that, unless you want those things. So you'll see there's lots of string functions here, and we've just used a 2 lower example. So if I go to that, it tells me exactly the same thing that the IDE was telling me at that stage. If I zoom in a tiny piece here and go to lower, so it tells me, hey, it expects one input parameter, the string, to change, and it's required, and it has to be a string, and it will convert it to lowercase. But this is what I love about the Bicep product docs and the ARM product docs is it gives me a really good example here of 2 lower and 2 upper, right? So there's the inverse of what we've just done. So I can say, hey, take this parameter test string 1, 2, 3, and it gives me that. I could literally copy that and pop that in my IDE and play with it and start manipulating it and get it working for me. So these things are really, really useful. As I said, just use the docs. And as you can see, there are tons and tons of functions. Lambda functions we could spend a whole session on, and they're something really new, but very, very cool to play with. But you'll see, like for an array function, right? we might want to put two arrays together. We spoke about that earlier. So let's do that. Let's put two arrays together. So we've got an array. Let's get rid of that for a sec. So we've got two arrays here, right? We've got this mixed array and this multi-line array. So let's put these together in one big array. So what we'll do is we'll declare another output and we'll call it combined array. I'm using camel case because that's just good habit. Do we all know what camel case is? Yeah, we're all good with camel case. It's got a hump, right? The first word is always lowercase, and then every word after that, you capitalize the first letter. It's got a hump in its name, right? So it's camel case. Developers are fun. Like they go snake case. Guess what? It just has stuff in the middle. That's snake case, right? So you've got stuff underneath. You've got Hungarian notation. Who knows what Hungarian notation is? Okay, this is old and people hate it in the modern world, right? But I actually quite like it. If you've looked at any of the IaC Bicep code, it uses Hungarian notation, but it's where you define the type of input as part of its name. So if I was to make a parameter, I don't need to put a parameter, like I don't need to denote in its name it's a parameter here. But actually, if I did this, like something like that, that is Hungarian notation because it's part of the parameter name. I'm telling it's a parameter. People hate that in the modern world. I actually quite like it because it's quite easy when you're going through and you're trying to list out, you've got a massive file and you just want the parameters. You can type par first and you get all the parameters. You don't have to worry about getting a mix of data. Horses for courses, people can use what they like, but a slight detour, but casing is also an important thing to keep a standard of. So we want to combine this array. So we want an array back. What do we want to do? Well, we want to union these things together. So union is the function we need. So let's go and look at union as we want. So if I go in here and look at union returns a single array or object with all elements from the parameters. For arrays, duplicate values are included once. So it's going to dedupe it for me. So if there's duplicates, I only get one return. For objects, duplicate property names are also included once. So you can also union two objects together and it will do the same stuff. So you can see here, it needs two arguments, argument 1 and argument 2. You can pass in more arguments as well. So you can pass in like 50 arrays to merge it together and it will merge it together. But you can see there's an example here of how to do this. So it's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to type union and then put the two arrays together. So if we go union and then I don't know what it's called. So I'll just say my multi-line array. Do you know what? We'll do all of them. Why not? You'll note I'm putting a comma in between them because that's how telling what different parameter to input. My multi-line, my array, my single line array. Right, I'm literally throwing all of the arrays I've got together now. So good luck on what I'm going to get back here. But we shall see, right? So this should now dedupe and throw all of these arrays into a single array together, right? So I will now be able to see how this data works. Now, when you're writing complex logic, this is really important because I'm now seeing what the resultant set is. I'm not guessing and going, I know how that works. That's going to give me back X. No, I'm getting told what it's going to get back, right? So as you can see, this is quite now a complex array of lots of things, but it has dedupe stuff, right? I only see my name once, really, unless it's part of an object. So it's done its job. So really good. It will dedupe objects if I smash the same objects together. So if I was taking two objects, because they're nested objects, it won't dedupe them because it's looked at them as an indice and gone, they're different. So it's not smashed them together because it's part of a different array index. But if I took those two objects together and smashed them together, it would dedupe them. Mr. Winter, go for it.
So one of the things I've kind of noted is that every time you're trying to check your logic, you're submitting it to to ARM
Correct.
as a deployment.
Yeah.
Is there a good way to do that without calling that, i.e. offline on the train, trying to check your logic?
You've got 4G, it works everywhere, don't worry about it. No, if you're living in Sussex and 4G doesn't work for you anywhere, then yeah, unfortunately there is no way to do this in ARM or Bicep. My man has got the nail on the head. So let's go and start diving it in to Terraform. So this is where Terraform has some advantages because Terraform is an executable. And remember what I was saying earlier around Terraform logic happens client side, right? It happens on the machine that is running Terraform, not on server side. So where I need to submit it to ARM to get the server to do its magic and tell me what it's going to do, In Terraform, I can split that back, I can bring that back, and I'm in control. So the Terraform executable is now in control of what the logic is going to happen. So I have declared exactly the same data in a set of Terraform locals, which are basically variables at a very high level as a comparison, basically variables. Somebody in Terraform is probably going to hurt me now, but like it's effectively what they are, right? So we've got the same stuff. So I can open up Terraform console. So I'm going to zoom out a smidgen because it's going to get messy. And I'm going to clear that. Also, if you like the PowerShell theme, it's available on Oh My Posh. Just look up JTracy93, you can install it. It also has a Spotify integration, which is amazing when you're listening to stuff that you've got no idea about. So the Spotify song and track will appear in there. So feel free to install that. I don't get any kickback, but it's always nice to see people using your theme. No, only every time you hit enter does it do a refresh to the Spotify API. But yeah, that would be really annoying. Like change mid-track and you've got like this really long song, but no, it doesn't do that. So you're welcome. So if we open up, I need to change directory into the right place. I don't know where I am right now. So let's have a look. Oh, I've gone out. I shouldn't have done that. Let's do it the easy way. Just open up another one. Wait for PowerShell to load. My laptop's also sitting down, so it's probably on fire right now. CD Terraform. Right, so I'm in the Terraform. I'll just do a Terraform init. I've already done this, but I'll just make sure it's done. It knows it's a valid Terraform directory. And then I can do Terraform console, if I type console correctly. What this does is it loads all of your Terraform configuration in that directory into the Terraform executable into memory at that time. And now I've got the cursor, the greater than symbol. I can now interrogate using any of the Terraform functions I like. So to access my string in Terraform, where in Bicep I'd write the parameter name, I write local dot and whatever the thing's called, right? Boom, I've got it back. So now I'm interrogating this locally, right? It's great. Yeah, one really annoying thing with Terraform console is you can't use the up arrow. So I'm just smashing up there, so that doesn't work. So that's really annoying. Also, if I type that and I'll be like, oh no, I want to go back and just change. Oh no, I can't use the left or right arrow either. So it can be super frustrating. So my top tip when using Terraform console is copy and paste everything because you can't get it wrong. You'll find yourself doing Control-C a lot, and then you'll do that, and it'll come out of Terraform console as well. So be careful. Don't do it more than once. It's really great for validating stuff locally. Don't get me wrong, but it can be annoying. Oh, good question. I don't know. I don't think you can. Always looking for an easy option. Absolutely. That is a good question. Why don't we try? Sorry, Alex. Yes. So you can interrogate what's already there, although you would probably more typically use the Terraform state command. So there's a command called Terraform state. Yeah, so obviously that depends on if your state is then stored locally on this laptop, which I would highly recommend it isn't. But you know that's one of the things. But the Terraform state command is what I would use there to interrogate. Terraform state list is the best command you'll ever use. Tells you everything it's got in its state file, all of its resource addresses, all of its resource IDs. Also, any of the commands, which we should do on Johnny's command that he's asked there, you can just do --help in Terraform. It just spits out a load of docs, right? So just use the docs. It's all here. So he goes, hey, you can use this, right? So you can point to your state file as it says legacy. Please don't do that. And you can pass in different variables as well. So if you've got like a variable that's not set, you can set it to then see how Terraform would interact with it. So say I had a variable that didn't have a default value, but I had some conditional logic that says, hey, if this is true, do this. I've got no way of testing that unless I specify a value for it. So I need to pass in a variable to it, which is totally possible. But you can't, as from here, you can't do Terraform console and pass in the one thing, which is unfortunate. So let's just go back into Terraform console and let's go to the Terraform. I'm going to close that page. Terraform functions. So again, this is all here in the documentation, really well written. So you'll see I've got all of these different things. So let's look at an array. Now, it doesn't call it an array function here, it calls it a collection function because it's a collection of things. So I can go, cool, what do I want to do to these things? Let's have a little look. We've got union, we've got slice. Why don't we do length? Length's a good one, right? How many things are in this array? So sometimes you'll be like, if there's 3 things in this array, do this. If there's 7, do this. Like, you'll have different parameters. Or like, if there's less than this number, don't do this, right? So you'll need to get the length of things in an array without actually counting them yourself. So let's do that. So what we need to do is do length and then pass in the thing that we want to get the length for. So let's go back to here. Let's get the length of this array. So let's do length, open up the brackets, and then it'll be local dot, boom, 6 things in that array, right? So that's really nice about Terraform, which you could call out, Johnny, that you can do this locally and yourself saying Terraform console. You can test some of this stuff locally. However, there are some times where you'll get so frustrated with Terraform console that you'll end up doing what I did in ARM. And now the nice thing is, this hasn't got, in my Terraform config, I've got no provider set up here. I'm not talking to any other endpoint. This is all local. So I could actually specify an output here in Terraform and call it, I don't know, Jack. And there you go. This is GitHub Copilot, by the way, prompting the code for me. It's trying to guess what I want. And yeah, I'll take it. So, you know, I can say, yeah, do you know what? Let's not do it that complex. Let's just go my string. Right, so I can say, yep, just give me that as an output, and I can run Terraform. I could run plan, but I'm not going to, so I'll just run apply, because it will do a plan anyway. And it'll ask me to approve it, even though it's not deploying anything. Yes. Pull. There we go. It's giving me the output back, right? Because that's running locally, it's just an easier workflow sometimes I find to actually just declare it as an output and get the data out rather than using Terraform console. Because the amount of times that I need to backspace or move left and right and get frustrated that I can't, I'll end up just defining it as an output because I can do those things there. It's just, you know, what works for you really. But the most important thing is validate that data types locally. Don't worry about trying to get I'm doing nothing about deploying resources here or talking to any resource provider or resource type. I'm validating all of that data locally here. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for there. I think hopefully that's useful for you to start getting and having more confidence to go and play with these functions and try it without actually having to break anything, right? That you have done no harm here at all. I've just gone and played. And this is what I do when I'm developing and I'm not sure about how it needs to work or how it is going to work. One thing I do want to show you, and one thing that just sort of snuck up there, was GitHub Co-Pilot. So who's heard of GitHub Co-Pilot in the room? Yeah. All the Microsofties in the room have definitely heard of it because AI is everything. GitHub Copilot is using an LLM, so AI basically under the hood, a model to help people write code faster. So you saw there when I declared an output, you see that it randomly starts popping up with stuff in like grayed out text. That's because I've got GitHub Copilot installed in VS Code and I've got it on my GitHub account enabled. So it's trying to second guess what I want to do. Now that's great. Right, that can be really useful. It can also be really annoying. So you can disable it by clicking on this little frog guy down here, and it will disable Copilot for the files that you're on. And you can disable it for certain file types. So Markdown, it annoys me insanely. Like it tries to guess what I'm writing. You're like, not even I know what I'm writing. How do you know what I want to write? So disable it for Markdown, but you can disable it globally. You can also do it in comment based. So I could say, create me a local with. It's even guessing what I want to write in here, with an array of names starting with Jack and then get creative. It will probably work that out. Let's go for it. Right, so I've now hit enter and I need to wait for it. Right, so it's now thinking about what I want to write. Now sometimes it can get ahead of itself. How do I invoke Copilot? If I do this Copilot, you can also force it. So you can open up this completions panel and you can see what it's thinking about. Right now, it actually hasn't done a very good job on this one, which is disappointing because normally it would suggest a load of stuff to do this. So that's rather annoying. However, there's something else coming out called GitHub Copilot X, which, you know, give it a new fancy name, which is more chat-based. So it's available in preview. So I have this thing. So I can now just start chatting about code with somebody that I don't have to chat to in real life, which sometimes is great. Sometimes it's not. So say I was looking at this code base for the first time, right? I'd never seen it, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on here. I just need like a summary of what's going on in this code. I can either chat to it here, or I can highlight the code that I'm interested in, and I can be like, right click, Co-Pilot, explain this. I'd be like, hey, it's a Terraform file. It's got a locals block, and it's got these things in it. And it's just literally started to write documentation and tell me about it. And now I can start talking about it like, okay, can you define this in PowerShell for me?
And is this Visual Cube's VS Code integration?
Yeah, it is VS Code integration. Yeah.
I was asking, why doesn't this bloody work? And there we go, because you missed it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, like, don't get me wrong. Like, a lot of this is where I'm actually having a lot of conversations at work with people about this. They're like, "It's going to replace us. Like, that's just done the work of everything." It is not perfect. It is still learning. So I quite often, let's create a new Bicep file, right? Because it's something I'm a bit more familiar with, and I can actually call it out when it's got it wrong. I did pass my Terraform exam last week, though, so you know, sort of half qualified to talk about it. Let's just call this Co-Pilot, Copilot.bicep, right? And I can say in here, comment, write me a Bicep file that deploys 100 VNets using a loop with a integer counter, right? So I might want to change the amount I want to deploy. If we let it go, and I think I've got it disabled because it's in orange, so let me activate it. Let's go back. Yeah, fine. Each VNet should have a name. Yeah, you go for that. Yeah, that's also fine. So it's asking clarifying questions, right? It's trying to like learn what I want to do.
You can remove the questions after.
Yeah, you can remove the comments at any time you like, but this should, right, now I'm on a preview version of VS Code, so sometimes not everything works the way you expect it to. Let's get the completions panel open and see what it's synthesizing. Yeah, it's having a bit of a flap with mine, but if I do Copilot chat instead, it's the same model behind the scenes. So let's ask it the same thing. Right, and the good thing about this chat, and now obviously it's minimized, it's sort of half hidden over here, so I'll drag that out a bit. But that doesn't look bad, right? But you've got these lovely buttons here that say copy or insert at cursor. So click there, boom. Right, so I've now got that code in my stuff. Now you can instantly see there's a lot of red flashing up. So that's valid, but what's it complaining about? Okay, so the resource group is not valid for this resource type. So it needs to be, you can't create a resource group in a resource group. It needs to be at subscription scope. So, but I could say, fix this. See what it says. What's it done? Oh, I don't think that's going to work. We'll go for it, see what it does. Yeah, so it hasn't worked, right? It's tried to make a fix, but it hasn't fixed it. So it's not perfect. So what I've been saying to a lot of people is it's good as a buddy, right? You hear a lot about rubber duck dev, right? Where you literally chat to a rubber duck about your problem because you can't work it out. Use Copilot as that. It's a bit more smarter than a rubber duck. And you can have a conversation with it, but you can work through most problems without having to speak to somebody else. And then you can go, hey, I've written this code, do a pull request review for me and stuff like that. So it's not got it perfect, but it's done a lot of the heavy lifting here. Like, I also know that isn't valid Bicep. You can't do a for loop there, right? That's just not valid. But that stuff isn't bad. You know, it actually should look like, if we were to declare this, you know, ourselves, like it'd be resource, VNets, Microsoft, virtual networks. Let's do this, virtual networks. That's not the one I wanted. Microsoft.networks /virtual. I could use a snippet. That is very true, Mr. Winter. Thank you. Res-VNet. Boom. But what that doesn't give me is this bit. But I'll trim this bit off. You can do this, so you can say, hey, for, and that's how a for loop should actually look in Bicep, right? Not like this. It should look like this. So it's got that part correct, like VNet index. Yeah, I can take that. That would go there, and range, that would go here. And now I could probably copy the rest of these bits into here. That'll probably work. I've got one too many squigglies. That's somewhat closer to what it should look like, right? Now I could go back to that chat and go, hey, you've got this completely wrong, right? And it would go like, oh, sorry. Like, yeah, of course I have. Like, I could just go back to it and go, this for loop isn't valid Bicep. It sometimes will argue with you. It's like, yes, it is. And it's like, oh, sorry, no, you're right. That isn't. It should look like this, right? Now it's invented some really cool stuff. Zip isn't a valid thing, but like it's getting closer, right? So that's what I would say. It's great and it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but use it to help you, not to replace you, right? That's what I would say. It's better when and it gets smarter as well. So when you've got a code base, it becomes aware of the code that you're working on. So it then knows the parameter names and the variable names and the stuff you're working with. So it makes smarter suggestions. So to be fair, starting from blank is sometimes pretty harsh on this stuff because it's literally shooting in thin air. But it is pretty useful. I think it's pretty crazy. Like the other day, somebody was asking me how to do something in PowerShell. Well, I don't know. I can't remember how it works. Like it would take me a while to look it up. So I literally took the thing that he sent me in Teams and posted it in here and then sent it back to him. And he's like, thanks. And I was like, yeah, I didn't actually do anything. But I've just worked smarter. And then like I spoke to him later in the day. He went, how did you do that so quickly? I went, I asked Co-Pilot. And he went, why am I not thinking like that? Like, and that's because it's a tool that we're not used to using day in, day out. But I think if we get more comfortable chatting to ChatGPT, please don't put sensitive data in ChatGPT. It will be learned on. Create your own private instance of Azure OpenAI to do that, or sign up to something like GitHub Co-Pilot chat or GitHub Co-Pilot X to do these things.
Do you think there's a level of trust asking someone a question and then getting the answer from someone else that you can't necessarily say?
They created it.
Yeah, like in that instance, where did the information come from? But that person said that information is yours. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Isn't it the same as like a kid asking you to write an essay for their exam?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Microphone.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's it. Like, I think the questions there were like, isn't there like a bit of a trust issue about like somebody's giving you data, you don't know what they're going to do with it and put it into some sort of OpenAI ChatGPT model and something like that? Absolutely, right. And it's that same age-old problem of when customers go, we can't have production data in the sandbox environment. Nothing you can do really to stop that happening apart from putting policy in place and saying, don't do that. And if they do, you slap them on the wrist. Like, obviously, there's data loss prevention tools and stuff like that, but you know, nothing's perfect. So sometimes it just has to be written policy. And I think that's where these things have got to evolve, right? Azure OpenAI service is out because of that reason. People don't want to give their data to a public cloud or a public instance that it's learning from. That's why Azure OpenAI is a dedicated instance of the models that are underneath it all, but only on your data that we're not going to take and use to train the models with. It's your data, you use it. So I think that's where a lot of people will do this. Co-Pilot also doesn't share your code, so it doesn't send anything you ask it back up. For GitHub Co-Pilot, they've publicized that in the docs. It only works off of code that is in open source repos with the right kind of licenses on them already that allows that reuse of code. So it's just learning off what's ever public on GitHub and getting better off that using the codex model. So that's pretty much all I have. Hopefully that has been somewhat useful. I'll go to the standard questions slide. Is there any more questions or anything that people want to discuss? You've got to use the microphone though. It's the end of the rule now.
This is
Is it on? Yes. This is like my direct version of just LinkedIn asking you questions. So with one of the things I kind of fell in love with Bicep and this does directly go back to what we were just doing. one of the things I fell in love with Bicep at the beginning was as a network guy, it being able to create you network diagrams outside of things like the network watcher, which is getting better as a network watcher is great. But kind of like a two-pronged question. When you're doing for loops in Bicep, it doesn't reflect that in the network.
Just
creator
puts
thing.
like a funny symbol on them, right? To say it's a looped resource.
Okay. So my question was, do you know if that's changing? And as a second question, is there a way that you know of to export that as like a vector image?
Good questions. So the first one, like, is it going to be show for looped objects as in each instance of them? Not that I know of, but raise an issue on the Bicep repo. And I'm pretty sure the guy called Ben Coleman, some of you might know from Microsoft, he wrote that thing and it was called the ARM template visualizer. But I think I've probably got it installed still. It's another, ARM template viewer. There it is. Ben wrote this, right? He wrote that. They ported that code into Bicep binary to do the diagram visualization. So it's actually this tool that is the one that's generating those diagrams for you. So go and raise an issue on this repo or the Bicep repo. They'll definitely triage it because I think it's a great ask. Even if it was like a flag, like do it or don't do it, like a Boolean, right? So true, false, like do you want this or don't you want this? Or feel free to submit a PR if you're that way inclined to read it and try and add that to it. For the second question, do I know of a way of it spitting out all of the resources to then create you a diagram? No, but it's because you'd have to write some logic that says when you see a copy loop, repeat this pattern 110, however many times.
I suppose more in a vector, like can I export
to
like
an SVG?
Visio or, SVG or?
No, not in that tool today. Add it as feature request though. Honestly, I think it's good asks. And put the most important thing, like when people are raising issues and feature requests from an open source maintainer of ALZ like I am, people just ask for things, but don't ask why they want those things and what it unlocks for them. Like what's the business value? That stuff gets me way more excited and go to management like we've got to drop stuff and start doing this because it unlocks this. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, somebody asked for this cool feature and we're like, it's cool, but like everything's a cool feature request. If we don't have that business justification or like that underlying story of how it's going to really unlock you like to do things, it's really hard for us to prioritize.
I'll put like Jack Tracy says it's a good good request.
Yeah, and they'll be like, who? Who's this guy? But yeah, honestly, add the business justification. It really makes a difference. Cool. Any other questions?
We had one online earlier.
Go for it.
Which was, does anybody still use ARM templates?
Yes.
Okay, job done.
Yes, they do. I would highly recommend that all of them start looking to go towards Bicep. It's so much easier to write, so much less overhead, so many less brackets and JSON compliant syntax to worry about on getting a speech mark in the wrong place or something like that. So definitely be using Bicep. And the tooling's so easy, right? So I've got, this is a valid ARM template, right? So I actually prepared one that is doing this already. I don't have to really do anything to start using Bicep. Right click, decompile into Bicep. There you go, done. Like, okay, again, it won't always be perfect. This is a really strongly typed template, so it's hard, it's easy to convert. If there was lots of like parameters in there, it might get a bit crazy with the naming. It'll work. You might just need to tidy it up. Right, but there's no reason not to be using Bicep, and it's definitely the direction forward from Microsoft. However, to answer the other question that generally comes after that, which is, are ARM templates going to not be supported at some point in the future? Absolutely not. ARM is all written in JSON. ARM templates are JSON, and all Bicep does is converts a Bicep template to an ARM template and then submits that. So it's always going to be an ARM template there at some point. Microphone.
Do you? Yeah, cheers. Do you know if there's going to be the ability to, when you submit deployment within the GUI, or like, you're ClickOpsing a new VM, where you can export to ARM? Do you know if there's going to be a export to Bicep? Yes.
Very much in progress.
Awesome.
It will be here pretty soon. They've been working on it quite a lot. So yeah, It will be here soon.
Awesome.
But yeah, today you export it to ARM and then you do the decompile to Bicep, right? And then you get like some even weirder looking template than you started with, but it still works. But yeah, it is being worked on.
Another question online was, is there any plan to fix the sometimes odd output of the what if command in Bicep?
The long run. This could be like the age old, another one. What if is very much a valuable tool that will tell you what it's going to do, right? So the what if command will basically run your ARM deployment, look at the ARM template and go, hey, I'm going to change these things, update these things, whatever. It is not perfect for some resources. The reason it is not perfect is because the Swagger definitions, which are API definitions that the individual resource teams must write and publish to our Swagger open repo, where they then pulls all this information from, is not always up to date. And it's actually not the Bicep team or the ARM team's problem. They're purely providing the service for what if, and they're using those openly published Swagger definitions. It's not their responsibility to update those Swagger definitions, it's the product team's definitions. So if you do see them, and you do see them in the wild, then please submit them on this repo. So what is it? What if issues Azure? I can't remember what the short link is. There you go. There is a repo dedicated to ARM template what if issues. There's quite a few issues, but please report them on this repo. So it's Azure/ARM template what if. And this is what the team triage and then pass down to those individual resource provider teams to basically say you need to get better and update your Swagger definitions. And they are targeted on this stuff, right? They're told to update it. So we can only fix what we know about. So make sure it's logged. Come in here, be a good citizen of open source, and like come in here and look. So if it's like for virtual networks, do a quick search first. Okay, there's none for virtual networks. Probably a good idea to create an issue then, right? Because otherwise, just add on to an existing one and just upvote it and make it more vocal. But yeah, I hear you. It hurts as well, but it's doesn't like what if and copy loops isn't a great story. Like it's also something that burns a lot of people. It's better than nothing than what we had before, but it's still not perfect. But let us know, and we'll try and get these issues resolved.
Thanks. Any others in the room before we close? No? All good?
Fantastic.
Okay, I think round of applause for Jack. Thank you very much, Jack. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
And yeah, just to close, thanks again for coming. Please follow our socials and everything else for up and coming meetups and everything else. And also just go back to that
on my way.
Yeah, there we go. Join our WhatsApp community group. We'll start to create a bit more chat, commentary, everything else on there. So yeah, thanks again for coming, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one.
Lovely. Cheers all.